meeting to order. We need to adopt today's agenda.
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 All right. We also need approval of the minutes from February 17th. Everybody have?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 All right, thank you. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board. However, the board may not take action on any issue raised unless it's included on the agenda and public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, the issue would need to be included on the agenda for a future meeting. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases and other adjudicative proceedings. Would you like any?
No comments this morning. You all heard my hello grandma message. I was trying to turn my phone off, honestly.
All right, so we'll move right into administrative business and the investment report, John.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. As you know, we still don't have an appointment to the Board of Investments, so I have not attended a meeting recently, but I do have a copy of the March 31st investment performance report in my packet on page 17 and 18. And you'll see, I mean, the month of March was a decent month, and I actually just received the April numbers yesterday, so I'll pass those around. And Dan, I'll email those to you. Dan Chamberlain, I'll email those to you after the meeting today.
Okay.
There's a couple of things you'll notice if you pass that around. Board of Investments has changed how they're tracking our investments. I mean, it's something that is still, I would say, they're working on, but they have moved everything to what they call CAP, which is essentially the combined assets of all the pension pools, and they're tracking it in one, essentially, it's like one fund, even though all the underlying allocations remain exactly the same. I think I had handed out that diagram where it simplifies, their accounting. But so the page I'm passing around, you can see the only two line items that it looks like we're going to get from State Street on a monthly basis is the STIP yield and the CAP performance. And that CAP number is brand new, so we don't really have any history. You see the inception to date number on it. The date on that is 4/1 of 2017. So, I mean, I guess the good news is our inception to date number overall is 7.69%, going back to 94, which is very close to our long-term rate of return assumption. I guess I don't have a lot of information. I know that Nolan has been working with Board of Investments, and so have I, to just get some more information about how they're going to display this new structure. They have to have all the numbers still for the underlying assets. Personally, I sort of like to see, how we did. If you look at page 18 in your package, you can see exactly how, domestic equities did, foreign equities, real estate, private equity. You get to see kind of a monthly update where, if this is what we're going to get, it's basically one number. It doesn't really tell us a lot. So I'll continue to work with David, Mr. Ewer at the Board of Investments to see if we can get a little bit more granular information. But this is what was provided just yesterday for April. And then once we have a board member on that board, we have a little bit more of our voice back as well. So are there any questions about the investment report?
All good until yesterday.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Maybe today will be.
I just looked and it was up right now.
Is it?
2 days. Yeah, 2 days ago it was really down, but it's been up for 2 days in a row. We recovered about half of what it lost.
That's good.
Yeah.
It was only 1.7% too. We got to keep that in mind. Looks like a lot of points,
But it was.
but it wasn't a big percentage. I mean, that's a bad day, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but it's not the end of the world.
Not 40%.
Yeah.
You scrape above the other national news.
So Nolan, we've got financial statements and budget reports from you.
So this, Madam Chair, members of the board, so this, kind of getting to what Sean was just discussing, you can see on the consolidated balance sheet here, with all these zeros in the equity pools, or the pools, I'm sorry, not just equity pools, but, and then there's a new pool, the consolidated asset pension pool, and that's the shift, and it's all an accounting shift. You know, 1 year ago, as of 4/30, these are all as of 4/30. You know, we had all of our assets in these pools, the various pools, and they've all shifted to this one pool except for the STIP. So for going forward, this is what the balance sheet will look like. As Sean mentioned, I'll be working with board investments on how the transactions are gonna work and how often they're gonna work. And that's kind of the big question going forward. And then as well as with the investment report and how that's gonna look, we're hoping to get it more granular, like Sean mentioned. Maybe, because there are 13, there's 13 allocation pools, or not pools, but what am I trying to say? Asset classes, yeah. That we should hopefully be able to get, and if it's not from State Street, maybe we can get it from Board of Investments, but that's all, you know, kind of up in the air at this point. But we're in discussions about that, so. So that's the big shift with these financials and how it's gonna look going forward, and even on the CAFR, it'll no longer have the various pools. It's gonna have just the STIP and the consolidated asset pension pool amount. And then hopefully in the investment section, there'll be more granular information, but. So if there's any questions on that, because of that shift, it happened as of, accounting wise, it happened as of March 31st. So they had to actually realize a bunch of, they usually realize our appreciation or depreciation in our investments once a year, at the very end of the year as of 6/30. But because of the shift, they did that all as of March 31st, and it'll happen again for the, you know, as of 6/30 for the 3-month period. But you can see on, I guess on page 21, the investment depreciation line there, the $138 million, that is what was realized in our investments for that, for the 9-month period from July through, does that make sense? Is your questions about that? Is that?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So from July through March 31st, we had 138 million in investment appreciation that was realized on the books because of the shift to the cap, and that's why you're seeing that large increase in investment revenue currently, but. Like you wouldn't normally see that this time of year. Usually that's realized right at the end of the fiscal year, so.
So it'll reduce the amount at the end of the fiscal year.
Well, you just
That
won't
it's
see
already-
as large
right,
of an increase.
right.
It'll actually, I mean,
Balance
assuming
out.
our investments continue to go up over the next, you know, till 6/30, that 138 million will be a higher, or a larger number, so.
That, you're saying realized though, that's not, those aren't realized gains from trades.
Yeah, yes, okay, yeah, right, they're realized on the books, I guess, so the market value is booked, I guess. But yeah, they're not necessarily, you know, they're definitely not cashing out of all of our investments and reinvesting or anything like that. So that's the big change, and especially like on page 20, when you see the revenue over expenses of $168 million. That's because of, that large investment revenue that was booked as of March 31st.
That's a big difference from the year before.
Yeah, it's gonna be a big change going forward, and again, we'll have, more information as we go forward. We're working with how often, they're gonna be doing the accounting entries on the revenue side.
I have a question on the liabilities on page 19.
Sure.
The uncleared collection.
So that's a function of, there's a couple things that go into that, but mainly the way we do our accounting is we take in all of our deposits, and it goes towards like a clearing account, so that we can make sure to book that revenue correctly, because we account for our revenue in member contributions versus employer contributions. So that goes towards, at the end of the month, that will be like a certain amount that still hasn't cleared into revenue. So it's still sitting in that revenue account. So that's part of that, but there's also a large part of that that's Board of Investments doing transactions. So, because they have access to do transactions on our business unit in the accounting system, the Savers. So they have a large portion of that that's kind of, it's set in a clearing account that they just haven't swept into a certain one of these assets.
So is it timing that makes it $3 million as opposed to $6 the year before?
It is, yeah, it's just timing, it's just a function of timing, yep. There's not actually, it's uncleared, there's not actually a liability that we owe anyone $3.4 million or anything like that, so. And I should probably, I'll get a better understanding of that one for next board meeting. But I know that it's not, any liability that we need to worry about. Any further questions on the financial statements? Move on to the budget, on the current operating budget as of April 30th on page 22. So because of the shift that we've talked about from some of the positions moving to the M-Trust project for accounting purposes, we're going to see a fairly large surplus in personal services. So I have it here at about 124,000. Now there is going to be some retirement payouts and things that weren't accounted for, so that might actually number will come down a little bit. But overall, we should come in under budget, by roughly 150 to 180,000 is what we're projecting at this point. Some categories we may overspend, but the overall operating, we're looking at about a $42,000 surplus at the end of the fiscal year. Or sorry, did I say $42,000? I don't know if I said that right. Any questions on the operating budget? We should come in significantly under budget, and a lot of that, you'll see when we get to the budget justification, a lot of that is going to be the shift from, the personal services from the regular operating to the M-Trust project, so that those costs can be capitalized. So moving on to the M-Trust Phase 3 budget status. There's not a lot of expenses to report at this time. The personal services, we're projecting a small surplus there. Hopefully those will come in fairly close to what was originally approved. Alfred, I think we just paid some invoices for Alfred Monksgar and Associates that were in May, so they're not showing up here because this is as of April 30th. But So there's, still zero at this point, but the only expenses so far have been the AMDEC, which is James' time, and our test lead, Monica. Any questions on the interest budget?
Noah, do we contract through Blue Cross to get that health insurance coverage?
No, that's gonna be the statewide plan that I believe is through Allegiance.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. It's bid out every 2 or 3 years.
The state self-funds the employee plan and Allegiance administers it.
Okay, there you go. If you have any further questions, direct them to us. Yeah. So yeah, but that's actually a set cost, and it's in one of the House bills. I'm not sure which House bill it's in, but it's set. The state amount is set every legislative session.
Yeah, it's usually House Bill 13, and it ended up being Senate Bill 294 this year.
And there was no increase this year, I believe.
Right.
And for the past couple of or legislative sessions, there's been some increases in the state share. But then this year, there was no increase, so. But those are all factored in here, and it's not something that we contract ourselves or anything.
Right.
Page 24 is just one of our biggest pieces, the contracted services, and it just kind of shows where we're at today. We spent about 68% of those contracted services budget, but a lot of that's, we haven't received some of those GASB 68 invoices that we're expecting from the actuary, so those will probably come in line a little bit, but we may end up with a surplus still in that particular category. And then the delinquent agency report on page 25. Sydney Public Schools actually has submitted their so how this works is, as of the 15th of each month, they need to have their reports in. So I would have been looking at this point, since this report was prepared as of May 1st, I would have been looking at March reports that were in right now. Because the April reports aren't actually due until May 15th. I realized that was just a couple of days ago, but when this report was prepared, we were just looking at March reports, and Sydney hadn't submitted theirs at that point, but I have looked. They've submitted their report. We're waiting for some checks and stuff, but overall, not a lot of delinquent agency activity.
Somebody able to tell me where Cleveland Elementary is?
By Harlem?
Kyle?
South of Harlem. I think it's south of Harlem, but I'm not sure. Harlem.
So just an independent elementary district.
Yeah, looks like one teacher
One
based
teacher.
Yeah.
So that's all I had for the financials and budgets. Again, the big change is going to be that that stuff that we're going to board investments on the move to the cap pool. And then, do you want me to just skip everything?
That's
Okay.
it's gone up a bit.
Should we move on to the budget justification or not?
No, we're item Z is the first thing.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, I'll be back in a moment. Janice and I met this morning with the Personnel Committee to look at the current salaries and where we need to try to get people to closer to market progressions. Janice, do you want to discuss a little bit about that?
Currently, the policy says we look 4 years back for average. And part of our discussion was, instead of using that 4-year-old, looking towards more of a every 2-year type number to make it flow more smoothly and not have big legs in the jumps. So that was part of our discussion. the director has expressed that Jim came in and did the numbers for him, Jim Cairns, and looked at averages and doing the, instead of basing things on 12, go to 14.
Right, so.
Go ahead.
We had Jim come in and do some analysis where he compared TRS salaries to compare salaries currently, and as well as TRS salaries compared to the 2012 market, the 2014 market, and the 2016 market. And he put it all into a spreadsheet. And the way the TRS pay plan reads right now is every 4 years we adopt the market, the state HR market from the previous 2 years. So in 2014 we adopted the 2012 market. And then we're scheduled in 2018 to adopt the 2016 market. Well, some of what Jim's analysis pointed out was that on average, the market rate for our positions is gonna jump over 14% because we're going all the way from 12 to 14. So what we're doing this go around, and it's a little over half the staff would end up receiving, the percentages vary from 3% down to, just under 1%. What he did was he took the better of the 2014 or the 2012 market and then compared that to our target market ratio, which is all part of our progression criteria and our pay plan, to come up with his recommendations, and that's what we presented to Carrie and Janice this morning. And then next year, when we're scheduled to go to the 2016 market, because in 2018 we are scheduled to go to the 2016 market, we'll be bringing a proposal to update our pay plan to look to change that. Instead of waiting 4 years to adopt a 2-year-old market, we will every 2 years. So in 18 you would adopt the 16 market, in 20 you would adopt the 18 market, in 22 you would adopt the 20 market. So we don't get so far behind and end up having these sort of inherent spikes, because that's what ends up showing up on the radar of legislative fiscal division, the legislature, and all that. If we can sort of even those out, plus from a recruitment and retention standpoint, for employees that aren't very deep into the progression criteria because their years of service are between 0 and say 5, they may get hired, and then 3 years down the road they're looking at basically the same position advertised in another agency using a market that in some cases is 4 years newer than the market we used to hire them with, and we lose some people that way. So,
Sean, you were also discussing this morning the fact that when we look at 100%, we're really only 85%.
only
Could you
in
explain that?
yes, so in a couple of in the band 7 and band 8 positions, which are our higher band positions, those are actually adjusted. So TRS has historically been sort of conservative in the pay plan approach, I guess is the starting point. When I got here in 2014, when we did this in 2014, which is the first year I was involved with it, due to the pay freezes that were implemented during part of the Schweitzer administration, TRS in 2014 was still essentially on the 2006 market. So in 14 we went to the 12 market, and then part of that plan was in 18 we would go to the 16 market. But even with that jump from 2006 to the 2012 market for our band 7 and 8 positions, that was a bridge too far. So for band 7 positions, they're actually adjusted so that 95% of the real market is 100% of the TRS market. And for band 8 positions, it's adjusted so that 85% of the real market is 100% of the TRS market. So they're essentially they're discounted. And those are essentially the executive director position, the chief legal counsel position, the deputy executive director position, and the IT manager position. Those are the 4 positions that are band 7 or 8.
Right, so when we look at those and they say they're 100%, they're not truly 100%.
Right.
What it ended up being was about $20,000, $20,102, which increase in our overall services budget, whatever services budget. So personnel services budget, not whatever budget. And we would recommend approval of that line item
Yes.
increase. It's
Yes.
about a 1.6% overall personnel service increase. That's not much.
No.
And we are giving some, like he said, there's a 3.2, there's 4 people are gonna get a 3.25% increase. The lowest one is a 1.95% increase. Everyone else, there's about 9 people who are gonna get a 0% increase. But they will still get that 1% that comes from the state in February.
Right.
And then there are some progression merit type of things that could happen as well, hopefully with those, and then we'll catch them up the next time. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, and that's a good point. Everyone is, because the pay plan bill did pass in February of 2018, all state employees will get a 1% increase. So everyone will be getting that as well.
Both of those are in the budget that we looked at for next year.
Yes.
Okay, so we don't need anything there right
You
now.
don't need a motion.
We don't need a motion or anything there. It's
No,
just a
it's
discussion item
included
right
in
now.
the-
Yep.
Yeah, it's included in the overall budget justification and budget request, so, just a discussion and a recommendation from the committee is all we're looking for.
And we do recommend
Yes, we do.
approval. All right, the budget committee report with Dan and Dan.
Yeah, so we met via teleconference on Monday, I think, for a little over an hour, and went over the next year's budget. And I think, we talked a lot about a lot of different things. The things that kind of we maybe talked the most about were some of the shifts in how we look at the in-trust folks. They're completely separate from the regular operating budget. So that was maybe the biggest shift between if you were looking at last year's budget versus next year's budget. The other thing we talked about is the amount that we spend on state contracts now is significantly more. The big change there is the IT. Pretty much all of our IT went from in-house to the state. And we kind of talked about whether or not that was a good deal for us, and then we decided it didn't matter anyways because we didn't have a choice. So, and then I think the final thing, that you can boil it all down to one number in a way, and that was the percentage of payouts, I think, that our budget makes up. Is that the right figure? The percentage of total?
The percentage of total benefit payments?
Total benefit payments. There's a state mandatory level that we can't go above. We're nowhere near that. And it looks as though that is coming down, and we think it probably will continue to come down as a percentage as we move forward. So I think those were kind of some of the bigger things we talked about. We did go into a lot of detail on everything that looked different. And I think this is a little bit different from maybe how we've done things in the past, in that maybe the budget committee didn't get this far into the weeds. We kind of did it as a big group. So I think we can decide whether or not it makes sense to do it that way, where the committee really digs in and we say it looks good to us, and maybe let the rest of the board know that we have agreed with that or would like to recommend approval. Or we can go back the old way and have all of us sitting here asking all the questions. But I think both Dan and I would say that it looks good to us. So, Dan, what do you have?
Well, I'll just add a couple things. I agree with everything that Daniel just said. One additional point that Nolan made is part of the reason that the administrative expenses are likely to continue to drop a little as a percentage of the total budget is because our costs are relatively fixed, but the total retirement benefits paid are going up at the pace of around $20 million a year. So that's the reason that percentage continues to come down and is currently less than half of what the state allows. So the operating budget is really well within appropriate parameters. And I would also reiterate that we grilled them for an hour and a half on all kinds of details, and I think it would be a service to the board that we continue doing it this way, just as a time-saving measure, not that we want to keep anybody from asking questions that they think are particularly pertinent.
I think it's a good idea. Would you do it every board
Yeah.
meeting?
No,
Or-
every year.
Once a year, yeah,
prior to the
absolutely.
budget Request approval, yep.
That's good to know. I think with the board, we sometimes look at the whole packet and maybe don't delve into specifics as well as we probably should. And you guys can do
It makes a
that.
lot of sense to have a couple board members that are a lot closer to that.
Thank you guys for that. So, John, we're talking about the PRISM annual conference report.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Madam Chair, members of the board. Yeah, first, let me say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to go to the PRISM conference. It was my first time. I didn't go last year because I'd only been on staff for about 4 months, and it seemed maybe a little too soon to do something like that. It was a learning experience. I think the biggest takeaways I had from it was that the diversity of the way pension management systems are around the country, whether it's public employees in general, teachers specifically, but just the variety of systems that are out there was kind of an eye-opener. And there's so many of the plans and programs that are going through something similar to what Montana Teachers Retirement has done in the way of redeveloping or redeploying or completely changing into new software management systems. Obviously, we're well down the road towards completion of our pension management software solution. So what I really kind of focused on while I was there was more about security and ideas around protecting asset, and that's one of the largest concerns that I think everybody has, and how to lock down and protect and be responsible for the systems that we manage. So I focused my attention on sessions that had to do a lot with security, data analysis, and looking at what other agencies or organizations are doing to be proactive instead of reactive in security towards from a software and infrastructure, IT infrastructure standpoint. So I found that was really good. I came back with a number of ideas, made myself a task list of things that I'd like to work towards and implement here at TRS, or at least maybe try implementing here at TRS. And I think some of what I learned there actually helped out in the completion of one of the tasks that I had in front of me, which was a data breach response plan that TRS we didn't have in place. And so I think going there and getting a lot of feedback from other organizations helped me complete that task, and that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later today. But it was kind of a real busy 3 days. I imagine that that's what these conventions are supposed to be like. A lot of information, really fast, and but it was good. I enjoyed it.
Where was it?
Nashville. Yeah, so it was a good trip. Chance to go see some 80-degree weather in March. So there was no complaint about that aspect. Yeah,
Any hockey?
Was that?
Any hockey?
No, actually the Predators were out of town.
That's too bad.
We did go to my wife actually went with me, and we did go to the Opry, which was a treat. But the Predators were out of town. It was just getting ready to start the playoffs, so that would have been nice to be able to catch one of those games. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you again very much.
And Denise, you got to go to Napa.
I did, Madam Chair, members of the board, as well. Thank you for the opportunity to attend the conference. It will be last full week in February, if I'm recalling correctly. It's the week of my birthday, so. I don't know if you all remember, but I always attend the June conference, the summer education conference for attorneys with NAPA. They also do a winter conference every year, which, you know, it's always been my understanding is a little more directed toward federal tax issues and federal law in the area of public pensions and that sort of thing. And because, you know, federal tax law has been moving so rapidly the last few years, it seems like it may be a good idea for me to get sort of more in-depth background in tax law. I don't know if it's because we're sort of in a dead zone with respect to, you know, federal regulation and that sort of thing at the end of February, but in fact, the conference was not that much. In fact, I would say really no more directed toward federal tax law, and that than the summer conference is. So Sean and I have talked, and it won't be something that we regularly ask for me to attend. It just doesn't seem to, you know, present the return for the money spent that we expected that it might. So, you know, interestingly enough, when we're not a lot going on as far as federal regulation, and of course that was a large part of the conversation, was what federal regulation is languishing, what's the likelihood that it's going to be picked up and carried forward in the foreseeable future, and you know, really and truly the things that people were concerned about as far as additional public pension plan regulations sort of died at the time that we passed the Puerto Rico funding bill, and the additional regulatory requirements were not included in that, and that was largely based on the status of the stock market, the good status of the stock market at the time, but now as well, with the cutback of regulation. So for example, the Cycle C filing for public pension plans for qualification letters, if you're recalling, that has been terminated. The regular program for filing for qualification letters has been terminated by the IRS. And that's largely because they were not funded and were not staffed to do the work that it required every 5 years. The prospect is that they're not going to be funded and staffed to do a whole lot more than they're doing now going forward either. So there's no real expectation that that's going to be picked up again in the near future. And so, you know, there's still clarification going on about how systems will get issues answered for legislative changes in plan terms and that sort of thing. It will all be done through the private letter ruling process at this point, although, you know, there's still additional guidance kind of coming out of the IRS about what specifically those will look like and how you can, you know, caption them so that they're sort of similar to a qualification determination, but not a whole plan-wide qualification kind of determination. So those things will go on. The other big issue, of course, as John indicated at the NAPA conference both last summer and in February, is the issue of system data security. And of course, we have a state statute from 2015 revisions to comply with as well. So that's something that we're sort of addressing: IT, legal, communications, all of that kind of thing internally. So other than that, again, I'm sorry to say, to be honest with you, I was hoping that the winter conference would be a real extension of the federal tax knowledge base, but it doesn't appear that's going to be the case. So
is that agency shutdown going to affect us at all?
the IRS agency shutdown, that depends on how much work we need for them to do, right? So if there are, we're through the legislative session now, there were no dramatic changes made to the plan in this legislative session, nothing we need to ask the IRS to look at or you know, review to make sure we're still a qualified plan, but there certainly at the beginning of the session was a proposal for potentially a cash balance plan for the teachers' retirement system. It certainly would impact us. I mean, we would have to do the private letter ruling process to get that kind of substantial change in the plan reviewed and qualified by the IRS. So
what entity does that?
It's still the IRS. It would still be their.
Seems odd that they would shut something down but then still be able to do it? I don't
Well, it's
understand.
not that they've shut it down, they've shut down the formal process for public pension plan qualification determinations, which in point of fact really only started in 2008. We've only been through 2 qualification, Cycle C qualification letter cycles, and it turned out, I'm sure, for the IRS to be far more work than they anticipated that it would. So it's not that they've shut anything down.
So it's just reverting back to something that happened before?
Right, so their audit function still continues. In fact, they probably, I mean, it's likely they'll step that up a little bit and conduct more audits than they did previously, like.
And that's kind of why I'm asking, because I thought if there's nobody checking, God only knows what's gonna take place.
Yeah, they just got rid of this sort of systematic scheduled review process.
And they are still checking. There are a couple of public pension plans, in fact, that have been audited in recent years. So, you know, we certainly continue our internal efforts to make sure we're always in compliance, and if we need a determination, we certainly go to tax council and we'll go to the IRS with a private letter request if necessary, but, you know, fortunately this legislative session didn't raise that. Other than that, I don't think there's a whole lot to report on the winter conference.
Okay. You'll wanna go to the summer one next time.
Yeah, and I am scheduled.
Okay.
You approved it last board meeting for me to go to the June. Yeah, right. Although it was nice going to Tempe in February.
But she said you don't wanna just keep going just because of that? All right, thanks Denise. Tentative 2017 meeting dates. August 4th is our next. It's a summer meeting when we kind of do a little training, etc. Does that still work for everyone
Yes.
at this point? My son could be in a baseball tournament, but they would have to win state and all these kinds of things, so I doubt it.
Kind of ideal for me, so.
I have another board meeting that, but I'll make arrangements.
And then October 6th, we still need to kind of make sure that one works well for everyone because that is when our actuaries are coming. Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
No problem.
I see you'll be home by 7.
Let me write that down.
Okay, so this is another time for public comment. Diane, would you have anything you'd like to speak on?
I do.
Okay.
In fact, I'm listening to your budget discussions and listening to your personnel report and listening to Dan Chambers' comments that we're well below our threshold for what we could spend. And I appreciate your prudence, I really do. And I know our members do too. Our members also appreciate a staff that's retained and compensated fairly. It means a lot to me to develop an opportunity to work with your staff and work with, you know, a skilled staff that you have, and I hope you can keep them. So I like the idea of moving toward a higher, you know, a newer market, and even the thresholds could be up a bit too. And I think it would serve our members well, frankly. The other issue is, as we look at perhaps the budget opportunities to continue to grow, you might look at a way to capture just a percentage, a small amount of that growth toward really strategic plans, like improving maybe internal auditing, more outreach for new staff members with employers, more training, more mechanisms internally for webinars or whatever you can do, coordination with PERS in order to do as much as you can jointly in training. So I see a lot of areas where, you know, I think you can still be prudent. I think you can still, you know, stay well under the guidance that you've been given, and I appreciate your efforts to do that because we want a well-funded plan, and we don't want you to be wildly spending. I think you've been careful, I appreciate that, but I hope that you'll look toward some real needs that I see. I'd rather have us keep our staff, I'd rather have us train folks up front, out in the field, so that we're not dealing with errors later. It's hard for our members when errors have been made, not on your part, but on the part of some employers, and they're ready to retire, and they get worried because they don't have their service credit or something hasn't been reported properly. I think a little prevention would be worth many pounds of care, and I hope you'll look in that direction. And I just want to extend my appreciation to your whole staff and the board for your care. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, and I do think, I think Janice and I both stated that today. We feel we're very appreciative of a good staff, and we want to be able to treat them. And the second thing we did with that is we did discuss, along the way as a board, the training opportunities, especially for, clerks at school districts and things like that. That's why we've looked at these webinars, and now that we've got somebody in that communication position and it's there, there's things that we'll look at, especially in August when we're doing that strategic planning. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
So,
Madam Chair, may I ask a question about that?
yes.
Earlier, when you were talking about the information about salaries that comes out of some national organization, there's 4 members whose salaries are going up by something like 3%, and there's 9 that are going up by 0. Can you give me a little more clarity as to why there's these different categories of cost of living allowance increases?
I'll let Sean talk about that. What I know is that the people who are not getting the increases right now are typically new employees. Not everybody, so don't mark, but most of them on that list are fairly new.
Okay.
And I'll just let Sean and Tammy discuss that, because I don't know enough about it to go with that.
So Dan, don't think of it in terms of cost of living, think of it in terms of, we have a progression criteria where based on years of service and performance, there's essentially a scale, and it goes from essentially approximately 85% all the way up to 115% if you've been here for, 25 years or 30? 25 years, it maxes out at 115%. So there's a target ratio for everyone depending on how many years of service they have at TRS if the performance is there. And so then we compare their current salary to that target ratio, and that target ratio is driven in part by the market for each position. So as your market gets older, obviously, you're not sort of keeping pace with the times. That's why it's important, I think, for us to move to the every 2 years updating of the market. But it's not necessarily everyone that's not getting one is brand new to TRS. There are a few people that have been here for 5+ years, but they're already above their target market ratio based on the progression criteria we have in place. And
I see.
And that's part of our pay plan for TRS. So we do, it's sort of a mix of things, and every agency's a little bit different how they try to manage their pay plans. TRS has its own pay plan where we recognize that it's important for us to retain our employees. So we have a sliding scale that is based on how long you've been here, and just recently, I think last year or the year before, that scale was adjusted because it used to basically max out at 110% after you've been here for 20 years. And so anyone that was 20 to 30 years of service credit essentially was maxed out on that. So we have been, sort of systematically making adjustments to the scale, and I think we're good on the top end now. The problem is on the lower end, as far as years of service credit, by not updating that market, you have people that are here less than 5 years. They can look at the postings on the state website, and they see, well, I do that exact same job here at TRS, and why is my market, so much lower? And it's because we're just the delay in going to the new market. So
thank you for the clarification.
Good question. We want to make sure you understand that too.
Yeah.
How about that? We have Ice Miller contract, or am I too far? Interest rate credited. Sorry, interest rate credited.
Okay, so Madam Chair, in your packet on page, here, 26 and 27, you'll see some bar graphs there. On page 26 is the actual year-to-date yield on STIP, which you can see for March is 0.92%. And then on page 27 is the annual yield on STIP, and the average year-to-date for fiscal year 17 is 0.74%. In this May meeting each year, the board reviews our STIP return from the current fiscal year, essentially, to then set the rate for the upcoming fiscal year. And that STIP rate is what members earn on their account balance. So their contributions that they've paid to TRS, the board sets the interest rate that those contributions accrue annually at this May meeting for the following fiscal year. And typically what we do is we take into account what's happening sort of in the now, but we also look at last year, where did it end up, and for fiscal year 17, like I said, on average it's 0.74% right now. It likely is going to end up being about 0.8% for the whole fiscal year, just based on the trend where they sort of are ticking up. But I think it would be a safe recommendation to the board to set it at 0.75% for the next fiscal year. And then of course that's open for debate and discussion by you as a board, but that would be the staff recommendation.
Do we have an opportunity to adjust it mid-year if we want to, or is it set for the entire year?
By statute, I think we set it annually, do we not?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
currently set.
It's currently at 0.55%. And it's been as low as 0.20%.
Does this mostly come into play for folks if they leave without being vested?
Not just that. I mean, there are plenty of TRS members that withdraw their contributions even though they're vested.
Okay.
So it
Anybody
comes into
that
play.
withdraws.
Yeah. Right.
Is this actually kind of in arrears? Or is it going forward for next year that we're setting this rate?
You're setting it for next fiscal year.
Okay.
So it's, yeah, you look at, what we're yielding right now, and so last year, I think I had recommended going to 0.75, and of course, if you look at the results for fiscal year 17, it's gonna be pretty close. I mean, we only went to 0.55%, so you can't really look at like when we get to this time next year, you can't look at basically the fiscal year 17 numbers, because I think this current year-to-date number is the best indicator, I think. And Dan, you guys know, you look at interest rates, I'm sure all the time.
Yeah. The Fed's more likely to raise than to lower rates at this point, so I think 0.75 sounds reasonable to me.
Any other comments on that?
Madam Chair, members of the board, just so you know, I did check yesterday, it was 1.01 for April.
Okay. What's going on? Thank you.
Move that we set the rate at 0.75%.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion about it? All those in favor of 0.75% interest credited to member accounts indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Thank you. Chair votes aye as well. We'll renew the Ice Miller contract. Tax Council.
Alright, so, Madam Chair, members of the board, on page 28 and 29 of your packet, you'll see the addendum to renew contract for legal services provided by Ice Miller, as well as Exhibit A, which includes the hourly rate for their work. We do not pay Ice Miller on a retainer basis. We pay them strictly on a per hour used basis, and so we have a certain amount built into our budget for contracted services related to Ice Miller. I don't remember right off the top of my head what that is, but we'll be looking at it here shortly. And I guess Ice Miller is a well-respected tax counsel firm. I recommend approval. Denise, do you have any comments you'd like to make about Ice Miller in general? I mean, they've been the firm that we've used for
since 1997.
Yeah, so
Right.
for a long time, they're well trusted, well respected, and
How often do we use their services in a year, on a yearly basis?
More
would you say?
frequently leading up to a legislative session or during a legislative session, because there are frequently things we have to run by them. Since we've been doing the M-Trust upgrade, there have been a couple of things we've needed to check to fine tune as we've set the requirements in the system and that sort of thing. I think for a long time, we had a cap in the contract of no more than $25,000. We typically don't come anywhere close to spending $25,000 with them in a year. While there was a Cycle C filing requirement, that would eat up a good $10, $12, $15,000 when we had to go through that process. But you know, some years we come close to that 25,000. Some years we've gone over a little bit. Most years we are well under that.
Denise, do we sometimes have capacity to hire them to look at tax consequences of upcoming bills?
We frequently use them for that purpose, Dan. If there are questions about compliance with tax qualification standards based on proposed legislation or ideas for legislation, we frequently ask them to do that.
yeah, and just for everyone's information, for fiscal year 17, we had budgeted 25,000 and we've spent just over 21,000 through the end of March.
And this has been a high use year
Yes,
for them
because it was
with legislation.
session and, yeah, and some other inquiries we made.
So we need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this issue? All those in favor of renewing Ice Miller's contract indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes aye as well. We are on to some out-of-state travel requests. There's the NCTR trustee workshop in the summer, the annual conference in October, the directors meeting, which is that also in October?
The directors' meeting's in June.
Oh, in June, okay. And the P2F2 annual conference, and that is for Tammy? Oh, for
Nolan.
Nolan, okay.
So, Madam Chair, if allow me, I'll take over for a second.
would love it.
So on page 30, there's not a real robust agenda yet for the annual trustee workshop, but this is the agenda that they have put together. The meeting will be held in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the trustee workshop is for Dan, since you're relatively new to the board. That is a meeting where in the past, we've sent up to 3 or 4 board members, depending on the year and the location and who can make it. And a lot of times we'll send 2 board members. Last year, nobody attended the trustee workshop, but it is, from what I understand, based on the feedback we get from board members that do attend, it is a good meeting. I think they provide some education, and maybe Carrie, I think Terry and Janice went to one a few years ago.
Yeah, we went to the 2 years ago for this, yeah.
I mean, maybe you can sort of speak to how valuable you think it is. It is a little bit spendy compared to like the annual conference, but I think if you feel like you get more training than you might at the annual conference, it's probably well worth it. I don't know.
Scott, do you know anything about that? We had brought back just some of my feelings. I've gone to many of the the only thing I've ever gone to is the trustee workshops, and this one in particular was at the Harvard Kennedy School, and it was like going to classes, and it was good, but there was just way too much discussion from the people in the audience.
Oh, really?
They took over, and it drove me crazy. So I really would not go back to this, simply due to that, but we did bring that to Scott.
Yeah, we brought it up in a big way,
Okay.
and we're really assured that is never gonna be a problem again. They just were not prepared to deal with what happened. With that, it's a relatively small conference. You're probably talking 80 people,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why it costs more, because you don't have any way to share the costs with a lot of people. But typically, you know, when facilitated appropriately, this has been a great conference in the past, and we've gotten a lot of benefit from it. It has a few more sessions that the annual conference doesn't have, but it still has the high quality of people that come to it. So I would recommend anytime for the trustees to go to that. I know there've been issues sometimes, even when Jill went to one, there was an issue a few years ago, but this year I know some of the people that they're bringing in include David Balt, who's the head of GASB, to speak to some of the GASB issues. Michael Hairston, who is the retirement person at NEA, which has a wealth of knowledge, and he was also a previous trustee, so he has a real good feel for where trustees are at in this situation. But they're looking at everything from discussions on how the Arnold Foundation is fitting into the big picture with the new administration, how to talk to legislatures, nuts and bolts kinds of things, so there's a communication piece with it. And then the whole thing scary and not scary with healthcare and how that affects not just systems that have healthcare tied to them, but our retirees. So those are just some of the things that they're talking about doing. There's always going to be a piece in there that ties with how individual boards govern, especially when it goes to Harvard, and it will be at Kennedy Center.
And it was neat. I mean, where we were, we were right on the campus of Harvard. The hotel was amazing. You could walk to everything. We were right downtown Boston. It was or Cambridge, but Boston. You were right there. It was wonderful. That was the good part. So if you're interested in going, I would highly recommend it. And it is better when you go, because Janice and I and Marilyn went, and you just get so much more out of it than going by yourself.
It helps when you're going.
Right, to be able to discuss the sessions afterwards, very useful.
So, may I ask any of you that have been, I would like to attend one of these. Which one would you recommend? Because I'm inclined to simply take your recommendation.
Mm-hmm. I think this conference means more to trustees. The annual conference has some great things as well. They're actually cutting back on the annual conference a little bit next year. They're cutting off all of the Wednesday for that conference. So it's essentially just going to be a Monday, Tuesday conference, and when their dinner's over on Tuesday, they're done. So I'm a little concerned about that. And we're a little bit further away from the planning for that, so I don't have as many details. But generally speaking, I think just because you have a little bit more working group activities with trustee issues, I think it's more valuable to trustees.
And there are only trustees there, so you do have a lot of ways to just talk amongst yourselves and other committee or other states, etc. You kind of get what's going on in their world.
Yeah, I've been to both. I really like the trustee side of it.
Okay, thank you for your feedback. I would like to then put my name in to go to that conference.
Okay.
Potentially just have to see how everything works out. I have been to a trustee conference a long time ago. Haven't been to an annual conference. I'm really torn.
That's the way I feel too. I've always felt like I couldn't attend the annual conference because it was so much of the week. But now if it's just a Monday and Tuesday and I could be back on a Wednesday, potentially I could go. I'm not taking a full week off. So yeah. How about you?
I think I can do the July one, and then we're having a baby at the end of September.
Oh,
so we can do the October one,
yes.
so.
Well, congratulations. Janice, how about you?
I think the July one's out for me.
Did Daniel use the pronoun "we are having a baby"?
Let's see how you're.
I'm kind of involved.
That's the correct pronoun.
Yeah.
I wonder how his wife feels about that.
Hopefully the same.
No, the July dates are unavailable for me. But I'm with Terry on the annual one. Now, being 2 days is perhaps more workable in the school year.
Well, they're front loading it a little bit to kind of try to capture some of the stuff, so they'll be a little bit more on Sundays where it was before, so they're limited in some ways.
Right. No, that's
But that's,
helpful.
they got a lot of input, and I agree totally that it's just too long, the former structure was just too long.
Yeah, it was.
So in the past, what we've done is, and I have your action items kind of written that way, is we'll get an estimate of how many we think can attend, or how many are interested in attending, and then we'll approve state travel for up to an amount of board members to attend, and then we can work out the details afterwards as it gets closer, who actually is going to be able to attend, if that helps your
Yeah.
decision-making process.
I'll just put some questions. How about you, Scott? Were you thinking of the Boston one?
I would like to go, I don't know if I can yet. Got some things going at home and everybody needs to look at, so. Depends on how busy it's gonna be.
Sure. And that's July 1.
Yeah.
Maybe up to 3 for
Well,
the,
Up to 3 for maybe.
for the trustee workshop, and then up to 3 or 4 for the, how is that?
Are you saying
Up to
board
3.
members, or would the 3 include you, cause, or seven?
I was talking just board members.
Okay, yeah, I wanna make sure that was the case.
Because I am if the annual conference will work, I would like to try to make that one work, because I've just never done that and see what it's about.
You're not gonna be able to do the fall conference either? Okay.
That's me.
Yeah, and I definitely can't do full.
You know what, Janice?
I would like to try the October one. I would have to check some arrangements. Yeah.
So we need up to 3 or 4 for the fall one too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So 3 to 4 for each conference, we'll look to approve for those two when it's time. We'll do them all at once, right? Or should we do each
You can,
individual?
we're in action items, so if you wanted to do the action item for the summer trustee workshop, you could, it's on
Let's
page
do that.
14 there.
Let's do a motion for the trustee workshop, and then a motion for the annual conference.
I'd move we allow up to 4 trustees to attend the trustee workshop in July.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes aye as well. And how about for the annual conference?
I move we allow up to 4 board members to go to the annual conference in October.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes aye as well. Then we'll talk about the directors meeting.
Yes, and so then, I guess we can maybe do mine and both together. So usually I also attend the annual conference, as the director. And then last year was the first year I've attended the system directors meeting, and I'm proposing to do that again. This year it's in June, and just yesterday I was asked to be a panelist at that meeting for early retirement and working retiree, a session on early retirement and working retirees, so that we have plenty to talk about in that area. But it was a really good meeting. In some ways, if I were only gonna go to one of the two, I think I would probably pick the directors meeting, just because it's really targeted to the issues that I face. It's more about administering and implementing the plan than sort of the annual conference is great. There's chunks of the annual conference that really aren't that applicable to us, where this meeting's, everything's pertinent. And I have in the packet, they have the agenda for the directors conference in here. For whatever reason, the heading didn't print on that. I noticed that yesterday. It was kind of weird, but it was a PDF too. So on page 32 and 33, you can see David Bott is going to be there from GASB. so that early retirement and working after retirement, that's the portion of the meeting they asked me to be a panelist on. Lee Snell always does a great job of giving us a heads up of what's going on at the federal level. There's a session on the assumed rate of return, which is a timely topic, the marketplace today going forward. So anyway, I mean, I thought it was a great meeting, and it's relatively, it's priced well. I mean, it's in Minnesota, so I've got my actual flight numbers, actual hotel numbers, and actual registration numbers, and I think it's gonna be right at $2,200.
I'm gonna talk about the P2F2 conference then at the same, or just do it one at a time?
I think maybe it would make sense to,
NCTR for you
yeah,
and,
and
all right.
then we'll move on to.
I move for Sean to go.
It's in both. I think we put that out there, and we're not overdoing anything here.
So,
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the travel request for Sean, the director? Okay, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
And chair votes aye as well. And then for Nolan, the P2F2 annual conference, which is Albuquerque.
Would you like me to discuss anything?
there,
Do you want me to discuss it?
sure, I'll just point out on page 35 is the actual request and justification form for that trip, and I think it pencils out to be approximately $2,250. And Nolan, if you want to speak to it, he's attended the P2F conference the last couple of years. If you want to go about it.
Yeah, briefly, Madam Chair, members of the board, it's just the conference that most of my counterparts throughout the nation attend with the public pensions and the teachers' retirement pension plans. And there's a good discussion on upcoming GASB, how to prepare your CAFR correctly, and so that it gets, the best from the users of it and things like that. So it's a good conference, and this year they kind of switch each year from the East Coast to the West Coast, and this year it's in Albuquerque. So it shouldn't be quite as expensive as last year it was in South Carolina.
I'll move to approve the travel.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Okay. And now, Nolan, we're to the budget justification request.
Thank you, members of the board. Based on the previous discussion and recommendation from the budget committee, member Gross and member Chamberlain, we won't go through this necessarily line by line unless there's questions from the board. The layout of the, overall layout of the budget justification is, you can kind of see on the, it'll go through on the left column is the description of the expense or expense category. They're kind of all grouped into, the major expense categories such as, personal services, communications, supplies, things like that. So those will show like the percentage of the increase, and that there's a column for the percentage increase. The left one column is the fiscal year 17 budget that was approved. That's the current year that we're in. The next column is the fiscal year 17 expense through April 30th. And then the fiscal year 18 request is what you'll be approving or modifying in today's meeting. The biggest thing I want to discuss is I guess at the very end, just so you kind of know where we stand, is we're roughly looking at a 3% increase from last year's budget to this year's budget, which amounts to about $75,000 increase from one year to the next. And then you can see on page 41 of the packet that bottom part is what we were talking about with the administrative expenses may not exceed 1.5% of benefits paid. And in fiscal year 16, our benefits paid were $320 million, and our admin expenses were roughly 2.3 million, which amounts to about 0.72%. So we're under half of what we're allotted, and that's what we've kind of been speaking to up to this point. So, but as far as the overall, so the personal services, the biggest member trusts spoke to this a little bit, about $155,000 in budget appropriation, if you will. Our budget has been shifted in personal services to the M-Trust budget. So that's why you see that there's a decrease of about 6% in personal services, and if that hadn't taken place, we would have had a small increase in personal services from last year to this year, but because of that shift in expenses to the M-Trust budget, we will see a decrease this year. Does anyone have any questions on any of the line items in personal services? Contracted services, so the next kind of expense category, we have an increase overall of about 16% in that category. But a lot of that's going to be these ITSD charges, moving from the ITSD convergence. And if you have specific questions, John is here to help answer some of those. He's done a great job of breaking it down, by not only just expense code category, but the details of those expense codes. And so I've been working with him, and then as well as ITSD sends out some stuff that I've been using to do these projections, and we've gone through this again with some of the board members and of the budget committee line by line. There is a $35,000 experience study that was not in last year's budget that we'll be expending this year, so that will increase that particular category also. So overall, in the contracted services, we will see an increase, of about $75,000 in budget, which sort of amounts to the overall increase in the budget for this year. Any questions on any of the line items that you're seeing there in that particular area?
I guess the only thing I'd just sort of reiterate, and I wrote that in the summary on page 15 and 16, is that a portion of those personal services are essentially going off of our budget for this year due to how we have to track the M-Trust project expenditures. So 7 out of 8 hours of a day of Tammy's time and half of Darla's time essentially is being charged to the M-Trust project, and that's where it's budgeted. So the board just needs to keep in mind when we come back next year, this time of year, when we do the fiscal year 19 budget, about 3/4 of those personal service costs are going to come back, and then the following year, 100% of those personal services will come back. So just keep that in mind. There's going to be, we have almost a 6% reduction this year due to how we're budgeting for M-Trust. But once M-Trust goes away, those personal service costs are ongoing permanent FTEs, so they'll come back to our budget. And in fact, probably next year, because the M-Trust project will be close to being over with. The scanning position has always been staff augmentation related to the project, so it's Jeannie Schmidt's position right now is not a permanent FTE of TRS. Everything as far as how the position works is, she's entitled to full benefits, all that, but we've never had the board actually approve that as a permanent position. And next year, this time of year, we will look to do that because there's so much work to justify having her continue to be our scanner. I don't see us any prospect of us going backwards better. So just a couple things to keep in mind for next year.
Moving on to supplies and materials, that particular category is going to be increasing by about $34 or 35%. And that is all almost, if you see the asset broker line, that's an ITSD charge that we really, have no control over unfortunately. But if you have any specific questions about that, but most of that increase is going to be because of that particular line item. We do have, some software that we're going to be purchasing, but we're going to be asking for less in computer hardware and things like that. So the majority of that increase is in that ITSD charge. Does anyone have any questions on any of that? Communications, moving on. One of our largest expenses you'll see is postage and mailing. So mailing out the handbooks and the newsletters. We haven't had as many of those because of the communication manager position was open for a little while this year, and so we didn't have as many newsletters and didn't do as many mailings of I think this coming year we're going to be doing the member and the benefit recipient handbooks. So we'll be mailing those out, not to everyone if I understand, but to the appropriate members. And so we're asking to keep that the same, even though we've spent less, and that's a large expense for us. So that's the only one I'll really go through in detail. Some of these also are ITSD charges that you can see are changing, based on the convergence. So overall in that category, we've come down a little bit. Now some of this in the travel, the next portion, obviously has just changed based on what we discussed in the previous action items. So the employee travel and the in-state and the employee travel out-of-state, we don't anticipate needing any more than what we have written here. But that $18,000 for board member travel, if you're, if 4 members go for each of those, then we'll need more. That 18,000 number will need to be 30,000. It looks like I did a quick calculation over here.
Well, I don't think any of us are saying that we would do both. It would be one or the other kind of.
Sure.
So I think those numbers are probably realistic.
If up to 4 go, so you can see on the side there, 4,500 per person. So that's going to be about 18,000 for the annual conference if 4 people go, if 4 members go. And then for the annual conference, if 4 members go, that's 3,000 per person. That's 12. So roughly 30,000. Is that what I'm counting?
But that's if 4 go to both.
Right.
And there's only
Oh, so
6
we're
of
doing
them.
2 of each one.
No,
I doubt
it's up
Up
to
to.
2, so I wouldn't worry about changing the number, and then if it turns out that more go and we're gonna overspend that category, we can either come to the board with a budget amendment.
My guess is
or
it'll
we
probably
can-
be a couple at the most
Yes.
to each one.
Makes sense.
I
Okay.
always say I'm gonna go and I
Right.
never do. So.
Last year, we did the same thing, we budgeted essentially the same way, and no one ended up going to the trustee conference, and I think Scott was the only one that went to the annual conference. So, I mean, as long as the board's comfortable with
Yeah,
doing
that's
it that way, and then if we do, and actually have, 4 go to one and 3 go to the other, we'll just come back with a budget amendment for that category.
Okay, my apologies. So we'll leave that at 18,000, and that therefore the bottom line won't change, at least on this. So the next category is small, just our rent. Well, not a small amount necessarily, but there's not a lot to look at there, and that's a fixed cost for us through DOA. A lot of these costs are fixed, and again we spoke in detail with Member Trost and Member Chamberlain on those. So if there isn't any questions on those, the repairs and maintenance. This is a lot of our software maintenance contracts that John does a great job handling for us, and have gone away because of the IT convergence. I shouldn't say a lot of them, but some of them have gone away, and so we have seen a reduction in that particular category. And it's possible that we could see, we've budgeted for that IBM FileNet, but it's possible if we move to a certain software perceptive content that we may not need to expend that, $9,500, but it's a good idea to budget for it. So throughout this whole thing, this whole budget justification, we try to be conservative and round up a little bit, rather than coming back to the board for, any adjustments, so. That's why usually at the end of the year, you see a surplus, or hopefully you see a surplus.
Thank you.
And, so that kind of, if there's no further questions, one of our larger increases, I guess, toward the bottom there is the audit fees. They budget by, rather than giving us a kind of fixed cost for the year, they give it for the 2 years, so the biennium. They're the only one that does it that way, so Legislative Audit Division, our expenses for the next 2 years, for the regular financial audit is budgeted at $78,000, and for the GASB 67, 68 work that they do, is $32,600. So those have both increased pretty significantly. But overall, operating has gone up, personal services has gone down, amounting to about a $75,000 difference between last year's budget and this year's budget, a 3% increase, roughly.
I feel good about having you guys looked at this and discussed it. And sometimes it's just too much. Thank you.
And a couple of real low-hanging fruit reasons you can point to is we'll have an experience study next spring where we look at the every 4 years we do an experience study that looks at the previous 5 years. So we're due to have that next spring. That's about $35,000, and then the audit fees as well as the IP fees. I mean, that's what's driving our budget increase. Yeah.
I move that we approve the fiscal year 2018 budget.
Second.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the budget? Okay, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes aye as well. So, just the information item is August 4th, 2017 will be our next board meeting in this quarter. Do you want to take a quick break? Let's try to be back at 10:15. Does that work for you, Daniel?
Of course.
All right.
Yeah, you want